starting between
Yeah, the other side.
That's what
Good morning. Thank you for joining us here today. You just heard not long ago from the Republicans that they allege they've done great things in this budget for the people of Wisconsin. Well, they're the only ones who think so. Certainly our public schools don't think so. They just got word that they're getting more than half of our public schools are getting less general aid than they did last year in this next biennium. This is the lowest level of GPR funding for our public schools in 20 years. So our public schools don't think they're doing better. The parents that gathered here just yesterday in the Capitol to talk about the needs of their children and the needs of 871,000 public school children don't think their kids are doing any better under this horrible budget. And certainly, these Republican legislators are following our absentee governor off the cliff. And in some instances, they're going even farther than our governor went, like taking $800,000 or $800 million rather over the next 10 years from our public schools to give to unaccountable private schools. These Republican legislators are doing great damage to the state of Wisconsin and great damage to our strong tradition of public education. And in many instances, they're making this budget even worse than this governor did. Take, for instance, our UW system. The $250 million cut is the largest cut that any state is making to their public university system in the nation. That's the horrible distinction that Wisconsin has from this terrible budget. Our seniors and individuals with disabilities who rely on our system of long-term care, they don't feel they're any better under this horrible budget and the uncertainty that is being created for them to be able to stay in their homes and continue the care that they receive. So this budget, make no mistake about it, is devastating for the state of Wisconsin. And everybody in this state knows it. We've heard from the people of this state. They don't like this budget. They want it changed. They want us to make investments in our public education. They want us to make investments in our roads. Now we hear that we're going to have a very large cut in bonding to our transportation budget. And what I can tell you is what the Republicans are proposing on transportation is going to result in at least 5,500 jobs being lost in the state of Wisconsin. And we will be releasing a Fiscal Bureau memo to you later that shows those numbers. Well, how are we going to make up for those jobs? Our job creation efforts, this governor and this legislator's job creation efforts have been anemic. How are we going to make up for the loss of at least 5,500 jobs under their transportation program and their proposal? Now, the Republicans were very, very quick to cut public education, to tinker and change significantly our long-term care program. But it took them a long time to come up with their plan to cut jobs. They were trying to figure out how many jobs to cut. And we also know we're going to see a proposal from the Republicans that reduces middle-income wages, that tells working families, we're going to pay you less, and we're going to see that with their prevailing wage proposal. In transportation, what the Republicans unveiled is they are kicking the can down the road. They are not coming up with a long-term solution for transportation, despite the fact that Representative Nygren, the co-chair of the Joint Finance Committee, said recently on June 1st that we'd rather look at a solution that solves the problem because we know if we don't do it in this budget, we're going to be in even more difficult position 2 years from now. We look at this as a long-term sustainability issue, not just a 2-year budget cycle, but that is not the proposal that they are making. They are not proposing a sustainable long-term solution to transportation. Their proposal is going to cut jobs, and their proposal is going to reduce wages for hard-working Wisconsin families. So this budget is a bad deal for the people of the state of Wisconsin. And next we will hear from Representative Katrina Schenkel.
Thank you. So we've just heard how many more jobs our state, under Republican leadership in both the Senate, Assembly, and the governor's seat, are going to lose. And that's not counting the jobs that we've already seen lost this year. Today is July 1st. It's an important day. It was the end of the fiscal year yesterday, and the Republicans, who control, again, Senate, Assembly, and governor, couldn't pass a budget in time. They couldn't agree with themselves. But we find out today, according to WKOW, July 2015, we have now surpassed fiscal year 2014 in layoffs. That is incredibly wrong. Our workers deserve better, and yet the Republican budget is going to cut even more jobs by delaying projects. Not only that, but they'll cut wages. I know I personally received a layoff notice for Gemini Cares, who has laid off already hundreds of workers across the state of Wisconsin, 92 in Stevens Point. I live right by Gemini Cares, so when I'm in my district, I drive by that sign a lot, and I see it as a sign of failure on behalf of the Republicans. What's interesting about the long-term care budget is we have not seen such fantastic and strong advocacy on behalf of so many organizations, like the Long-Term Care Coalition, Save Iris, and many other organizations, Disability Rights Wisconsin, BPDD, the Survival Coalition. We saw hundreds of people in the Capitol day after day to talk to their legislators about keeping long-term care at home and keeping IRIS as a separate program. What we saw happen were layoffs for long-term care support providers, both in my district and across the state. We saw Minnesota bail out Gemini Cares and start hiring workers. Those jobs moved, some of them moved to Minnesota. And what we also saw was a dereliction of duty by our Republicans. They said they were going to fix it, and they didn't. If you ask the Long-Term Care Coalition, if you ask the Survival Coalition, if you ask anyone who works for a managed care organization, they will tell you that the proposal the legislative Republicans advanced through joint finance does not help them, and they prefer current law. So I'm extremely disappointed, because I know Assembly Democrats, legislative Democrats have held dozens of budget hearings across the state, and one of the biggest issues we heard from people on, tears were shed at just about every single one of these events, was about long-term care. We have people who care more than anything about quality of life, dignity, and independence, and managing IRIS as a separate Medicaid waiver program and keeping our managed care organizations the way they are was extremely important to them, and still is. And yet we see in this budget, not only will we lose jobs over this, but these people are not happy, and what strikes me is it took Republicans over a month. They last met on May 29th. It took them over a month to reach a deal on the bucks, transportation, and prevailing wage. We're not even quite sure if they have the deal yet, according to the Senate, but it didn't take them more than just a few days, a couple weeks, to sit down and not do their duty and represent their constituents by saving the long-term care system. They didn't have the bravery to look their constituents in the eye and say, you know what, we're not going to save the system for you. But if you ask any of those people, and I'm sure you can find a few in the Capitol, they'll tell you they're extremely unhappy, they're losing sleep at night, and they're contacting their legislators, people like us, who are carrying the water for them and championing a long-term care to keep it the way it is in the budget. This isn't just a jobs issue, it's a moral issue. This is about dignity and independence, and we're extremely disappointed to see the long-term economic impact of these poor long-term care changes Republicans have chosen to advance when they could have done the right thing. Next, we have Leader Barca.
Well, here we are, July 1st. It's an important day because it's the start of a new fiscal year. I guess that means the governor, under his new standard, can run for president. But it doesn't mean that the state is in good or better condition. In fact, we are in far worse condition because of Republican leadership in this state. The Republicans control it all. They have the governorship, they have the Senate, they have the Assembly, and here we are next week at long last, we're going to start the budget process. But we learned this morning that that doesn't mean the budget will even necessarily pass next week. Senator Fitzgerald says he still doesn't have the vote. So I don't know what kind of deal they've arranged that doesn't necessarily at least allow people to have some certainty of what their life is going to look like over the course of the next 2 years. But the one thing we're certain about is it is going to look far worse in Wisconsin the next 2 years than it's looked the past 2 years. It's going to look far worse for one of the premier university systems in the country, if not in the world, with $250 million being taken out. It's going to look a lot worse for K-12 education, as school districts can't even plan, knowing that they're going to lose $800 million over the next decade. It's going to look far worse, as our assistant leader said, for senior citizens and people with disabilities whose lives and their quality of life is going to go down in this state. Make no mistake about it. But then we find out the one thing that's held up the budget, they've messed up totally. And that has to do with transportation, it has to do with infrastructure, it has to do with jobs. We have no idea what they're going to do on taxes, although the thing we can be assured of is the middle class will be worse off with whatever they end up doing on taxes. And the very wealthy will be better off. That much we can bank on because they've been consistent time and time again. Every tax plan they have benefits those at the very top at the expense of the middle class. But worse than that, the middle class will suffer because of what they're doing on infrastructure, transportation, and prevailing wage. At the end of the day, whatever they pass on prevailing wage is going to further drive down wages in this state. Also on transportation, as our ranking member of finance found out through a fiscal bureau memo, that we will be 5,500 jobs worse off than even what the governor put forward, which already was bad. And here they promised, the governor when he first ran, no more kicking the can down the road. The head of finance just a month ago, we need to finally come to some resolution. They are kicking a bigger can down a longer road, increasingly filled with potholes. The statistics are clear. The conditions of Wisconsin's highway system is below average. And they're not willing to do anything responsible about it. But to cost the Wisconsinites lower wages, to cost Wisconsinites poor infrastructure, to cost over 5,500 jobs, even from the governor's pitiful budget that he put forward, as well as all the other items that our other leaders have talked about, is just unfortunate. And the people of Wisconsin, I think, have had enough. The Marquette poll shows the governor's numbers are at 41% approval. I can't wait to see what they're going to be at after this budget passes and it settles in what the state of Wisconsin is going to be over the next 2 years. So thank you for coming. With that, we'd be happy to answer any questions about this very harmful budget that they're thrusting on the people of Wisconsin and that we don't even know if it'll pass next week. Thank you.
Should the Finance Committee be responsible for deciding how an additional, from what we understand, it's $500 million for transportation projects and an additional $350 million that Finance will then decide whether to approve projects from the DOT? Is that the right way to go? Should Finance be deciding which road projects to get?
No, they shouldn't. As a matter of fact, historically in this state, and I go back to the John Torinas editorial, someone that's been involved for so many years. It used to be in this state that you had people plan, that you involved the public in decision making. There was a Projects Transportation Commission that analyzed what our long-term interests were in terms of building infrastructure in this state. And unfortunately, the governor's not following that process. He doesn't have a very methodical plan at all. And it's unfortunate, the process that they're choosing to follow.
Are Democrats open to voting on the Bucks Arena as a standalone proposal?
We're open to it, but let's make no mistake. The chances for keeping the Bucks in the state of Wisconsin and for protecting the taxpayers has gone down dramatically by this decision to make it a standalone bill. Just historically, very difficult to pass these things in standalone bills. Now, I'm not saying it may still pass. I hope it does. However, we've not been party to any of these negotiations. I have a copy of the document that they released late on Monday. We're starting to digest it. We still haven't been briefed on it. The finance members were started to get a briefing this morning on this. But I know we're meeting with the governor tomorrow, and we're going to have a lot of questions. And I hope they're open to changes, because we believe there could be some better arrangements for the people of Wisconsin.
Will you ask for things outside of the Bucks Arena in exchange for support of the Bucks Arena?
Our plan is to focus on this deal as it stands right now, and we look forward to that meeting tomorrow. We'll be caucusing to analyze this deal. The members just received a copy just in the last 36 hours, and it's startling, frankly. A lot of things in here I was not aware of.
As it stands right now, what is the sense that you're getting from your caucus on that deal?
I think there's there's a number of members in our caucus that are certainly open to it, but they haven't seen the deal. I mean, it's hard to really say to someone, what do you think? Do you think you can support this? When they really have not been briefed on it. They've never been party to any negotiations. So we don't know where people are at individually right now. I know people are trying to keep their options open. They're trying to be open-minded. And I appreciate my caucus for doing that.
Are there any concerns in particular that Democrats have with the arena proposal as it stands now?
Well, I think it's premature. I think we'll have more to say on that tomorrow after we've been thoroughly briefed. Any other questions? Otherwise, thank you very much for coming. The rules that are here,